Hi, everyone, and welcome to For Immediate Release. This is episode 448. I'm Neville Hobson.
And I'm Shel Holtz, and it is time for another segment of our recurring series, X is Dead. This is X as the algebraic symbol, not the formerly Twitter. It's been a long time, but we do occasionally dedicate some time to arguments that something we've been all taken for granted is dead. And in just the last week, I saw two of these, both on LinkedIn, and both making pretty compelling cases. Let's start with change management. Caroline Kealey wrote this one, titled 2025, The Year Change Management Died. I've known Caroline for years through IEBC, and she has a global practice in change leadership. A point she makes in the article, she calls it a sobering realization given her work in change management for the last 20 years. But she says change management isn't working. It had been a useful third pillar in the traditional triangle of strategy, project management, and change management when deploying planned transformations, she writes. That was then, this is now. Caroline says we're now operating in a fundamentally different world. The assumption of toggling between periods of change and of business as usual entrenched in traditional change management now seems quaint, she writes. A variety of patterns account for change management's demise, including the dismantling of trust and legitimacy across all sectors. There's a pervasive AI-inspired fear of becoming obsolete. Employees feel overwhelmed and underwhelmed at the same time. Silos are calcifying as we retreat to information cocoons, and people are in a perpetual state of continuous partial attention. Caroline is certified in the ADKAR model of change management, but she says that the thing that is changing isn't clear. The essential quality of organizational today tends to be emergent, not planned, making it hard to progress through a change sequence. And the ADKAR model, that's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, falls apart these days at the desire checkpoint. Where we go now, she says, is to clarify the North Star. In the fog of chaos, many teams have lost the plot, she writes. Before introducing a map, focus on the compass. Make sure your teams are crystal clear on which way is north. That is, ensure the goal of your goals is well defined. Second, cut out or trim the noise in your organization so your employees' attention and focus are on the right things. And third, cultivate sturdy leadership. Now, the second piece is from Sharon O'Dea, founder of DWXS and Lithos Partners, a pair of communication-focused firms in the Netherlands. For Sharon, it's enterprise social networks that's dead. She says she was speaking to a comms leader who was surprised when the hashtag they created for a public launch wasn't used by anyone other than members of their own team. Not a single mention across external social or their internal social channels. She ascribes the death of enterprise social networks to the shift to short-form video as the social networks where we all used to immerse ourselves, Twitter, Facebook, have gone bad. Public social media turns toxic. People have shifted to sharing in small groups or not at all, she writes. A phenomenon that you and I have discussed a lot recently, Neville. It's no surprise, then, that we're all seeing that shift reflected in how people communicate at work. And, she says, she's hearing a lot of that participation in enterprise social networks is failing. A lot of companies are shutting them down. She also sees digital fatigue as a contributor. One thing she wrote gave me pause. She says, Viva Engage, which is what Yammer evolved into, continues to lack clarity of purpose. A report that looked at data from hundreds of organizations concluded that Viva Engage has shifted from a collaboration and community tool to a broadcasting platform for communicators. To me, that's blaming the tool for how people use it, kind of like blaming PowerPoint for bad presentations. In any case, Neville, change management and enterprise social networks. What do you think? Are they done?
They ought to be. I mean, I think when I read Caroline's piece, it's a very well-written article, and it does provoke a lot of thought, even though I don't see a lot of trenchant discussion going on. I see a lot of agreement to her points in the comments, which is good. But a couple of things stuck out to me, kind of like flashing lights almost, some of the comments she made. One is unquestionably a reality of what's happening now, and this is connected directly to what we've been talking about recently, the collapse of trust. So she says, just when we crave institutional stability the most, we are seeing the dismantling of trust and legitimacy across every sector: politics, business, culture, education, religion. So if you kind of extrapolate that to Edelman's trust barometer, which we've discussed in 2 episodes recently, that is spot on in terms of what's actually happening. Collapsing trust, I'd say it's collapsing as opposed to declining. It's in serious trouble. People do not trust organizations and the people who lead them. And we're seeing that played out in reports like this, including the other one we talked about in the last episode from Fleischman-Hillard in terms of focus on corporate affairs. That is a kind of a yes, we need to recognize that, which is part of her argument. But then at the end, I think, is a point as well. So we recognize trust has collapsed, which is behind a lot of these shifts that are happening. Caroline says in her concluding points, what the world needs now is a forward motion propelled by a new form of leadership, one that holds the tension between being grounded and unleashed, between head and heart, and between fear and hope. The collapse of traditional models is an invitation for the brave to challenge, to reinvent, and to create. Absolutely spot on in my view. So the old models, change management, I see some comments recognize this as a term, and maybe the way it's been practiced, that's been going for 2 decades and more. I can remember a decade ago when I worked for IBM, that was what I was doing was kind of attached to change management programs in the mega enterprise monolithic style. You know, here's the rigid rule book. We follow this every step, and there's absolutely no divergence from this. And so you think that, in fact, I now think about it, question, was that really effective back then? I don't believe that works at all today in this current changing climate. So where are the new leaders then who can nod and say, yeah, absolutely, it's all changing. So what are you going to do about it then? So that's a big point that's come out of Caroline's article. Sharon's article is also great. Is enterprise social over? I would say the way it's been done for X years ought to be over. We need something different. She says, again, this struck out to me, one of the comments she mentioned. Anecdotally, she says, I'm seeing more comms pros report declining participation and engagement on their ESNs. They're questioning whether to relaunch them or close them down. I'd say the latter is probably the best route to go if you're asking this or that. But I think also people, is it perhaps that there are too many organizations who have these expecting, it's almost like saying, if we put it up there, they will come and use it.
If we build it, they will come.
They're not doing that. That's the thing. And with the lack of trust, and again, these are very generalized comments, I have to say, but we've talked about this. The younger you are, the more questioning you are, and the less willingness to accept you must do this simply because some senior person with a long job title tells you that. Or we've done this survey that says this is where we're going to go. People want to be, I guess, smooched a lot more. You know, they need to be schmoozed. That's the word, not smooched, smoozed a lot more, to recognize value that they provide to the organization because they're the future. They're the future. But it works both ways. You've got to have a bit of give and take here. We're not seeing that. It's there's too much. In fact, it's not even carrot and stick, Shel, I don't believe. You don't, there's no dynamism in my view with some of these things. Yes, all these tools are there, expecting miracles to happen. And I think, you know, again, back to my IBM days, this rather cool tool at the time, the name of which I can't recall offhand, it was a bit like Gagalamp, that kind of tool, an employee advocacy tool as part of an advocacy program where you have pre-written text people would share across social networks. And there was a alacrity to do this, gamification approach to it. You get rewards and there's peer pressure and competitions, all that. I think those are absolutely artificial now, frankly. So in the sense of advocacy in such a controlled manner. So those are all things that maybe we ought to be questioning how they fit in an enterprise in particular. So it probably means, I'm just glancing through Sharon's article, do we need to review the role of ESNs in the channel mix? Yes, we do, I believe, or just accept things change and maybe the time's just coming to end. That could be the answer too. But something must replace these things, I would say. So this is therefore the time, perhaps, turmoil, again, that we haven't seen in quite a while, the way we're seeing it, that's a reflection of what else is going on. So these are all jigsaw pieces in the big puzzle, it seems to me. But change management, as Caroline writes, I don't believe that has a future at all in that form. But I can't tell you, because I'm only just reading this, what I think should replace it. I don't know that. I think that needs some more conversation. But it's excellent what both of these have written because it's stimulating discussion.
Absolutely. I thought both of them were outstanding pieces, and I am I'm largely in agreement with some caveats. With Caroline's piece on change management, I mean, all of the conditions she outlines, all of the changes that we've gone through, where people are at, and the nature of much of the change organizations are facing these days, I think she's right. It is emergent. But there is still programmatic change that happens in organizations. There are mergers and acquisitions. There is a change in a core technology that the organization uses, and you have to get employees from here to there in a defined period of time. And I think largely the principles of change management continue to apply in those narrow circumstances. In terms of enterprise social networks, I think that, and this is based largely on my experience, 21 years as an independent consultant working with organizations on their digital internal media. And most of them are introduced to the organization using what I have for years called the Godspeed method, which is, here you go, everybody, viva engage, Godspeed. And what we need is a culture of messaging. It was Pitney Bowes, maybe 23, 24 years ago, I was at a conference and I heard somebody from Pitney Bowes talk about message mission control. Somebody needs to establish the culture of messaging and reinforce it. This is what this tool is for. Here's how you use it. This is what this one's for. Here's how you use it. We don't use it for this. We use it for this. We use this for that. And reinforce that through, among other things, reward and recognition. Call somebody out for having used a messaging system well in support of organizational goals. Other employees look at that and go, oh, is that what you get recognized for around here? Oh, I can do that. And we need tools that allow employees to share knowledge and information with each other. And Caroline, in the change piece, talks about calcified silos. And that's absolutely happening. In organizations, we can't let that happen. That means organization is trapped in those silos, and people who need it can't use it. Back in 1996, and there were no intranets, there were no enterprise social networks, Bob Buckman at Buckman Labs started a social network at his company called Kinetics, and it was for one specific reason. It was for people who needed information in order to do something work-related, would post it, and everybody was expected to check in daily, and if they had the answer, they were expected to share it. He was not looking to establish enterprise social networks and make them succeed. He was looking to create a knowledge-based organization rather than one where people kept their knowledge because it was power, and sharing it should exact some sort of cost. Which is what happened in a lot of organizations. And it was wildly successful, largely because he was the most active user. Everybody saw him out there and knew that he would see them sharing or soliciting information. And he would also notice the people who weren't participating. This is what I mean by establishing a culture of messaging. This wasn't, hey, let's have an enterprise social network and we can throw hashtags out there when we're launching a program. This is a very well-defined network that had a clear purpose and clear expectations, and everybody could see how it benefited the organization. But he was clear. He came right out and said in a memo to employees that if you don't use this, there are opportunities in this organization that are going to close up to you. So I think you can have success with these, and I think we need to find success with these, especially in a world where we have a lot of workers who are remote or hybrid, and you're not all in the same room at the same time, to be able to share knowledge and information. But it needs to be ingrained in the culture, what it's for, how it's used, what we use it for, what it's not for, and what the expectations are.
I remember one of the conversations we had in an episode within the last 6 months, I think, talked about people in organizations, in teams, trusting their direct supervisor, the person they report to in the team. And I think that's where this needs to focus. So one of the points that Caroline makes in the 3 steps to consider, I think this would be very germane to this part of the conversation. She says organizations are aching for sturdy leaders, change agents, managers and executives who have the fortitude, the skill and capabilities to support and galvanize teams. building fit-for-purpose leadership capabilities and leading through change, chaos, and ambiguity is vital. So that stuck with me now in the context of what you're saying here. That, in my view, is how you need to galvanize people to participate in knowledge sharing in an organization, not the kind of almost threatening approach. I see you're not using the network, and these things are going to be closed to you if I don't see you doing this here. That ain't going to work today. That worked 30 years ago. And I'm thinking now in many organizations, I'm just reflecting on one in particular that I did some work with last year, that everyone looked about 12 years old. I mean, they're under 30, most close to 20, and their whole approach was different. And that struck me as an observer. It wasn't at all in any way negative at all, unless you were someone who really had difficulty dealing with people younger than you who were utterly different to you. So I think we're seeing that more and more. We've talked many times about the new wave coming into the workplace who were born after 2000, who are different. Expectations are different. Our structure's that different. I mean, I'm not in the enterprise loop so much as I used to be, working for big organizations. But what I observe, what I hear anecdotally, sure, is you've got to make connections with their younger generation. You're on their mobile phones, all this kind of stuff. If you build an intranet, it's there, they'll come. They won't if they can't get it on their mobile device in a way that is easy, user interface, all that. So these are, I think, elements of the points Caroline's making in particular, and the points that Sharon makes too, in what she's saying about enterprise social networks. So it reminded me actually when she talks about Yammer, Viva Engage now. I remember, this is about 15, 16 years ago, introducing Yammer to an organization that I felt this was perfect for this organization. And employees with alacrity jumped on this. Before you knew it, 60 people had signed up and were chattering away. And I thought, oh my God, we got an emergency here, because there was no strategy behind it. There was no guidance on what to do and how to use it. And it caused some significant issues, particularly as some of the senior leaders in the organization didn't think it was a good idea at all. Others did. So that wasn't the way to do it. But what struck me about it was a kind of a hidden and suddenly emerging desire by people to share things that way that didn't exist in any shape or form. And they just jumped on it like nobody's business. And I've often reflected on that as an example of great outcome, but absolutely not the way to aim for it. So the point I'm making, though, is that it helps you discover, I think, preferences of people in ways that are live right in front of your eyes. You can see it. And if you can somehow embrace that, and that to me means not the CEO or a very remote senior leadership figure, particularly if you're a big organization, but that small part of the organization you're in and your leader. If you see he or she embracing this and you trust that person, and that's becoming more important. I've forgotten who it was, Sharon or Catherine talked about cocoons, the old silos that we're talking about getting calcified. I agree, but they're still there in many organizations. So silos aren't necessarily a bad thing if they're not closed silos. In fact, silos is the wrong word. Yeah, you need small groups of people. Maybe that's more in line with what we're seeing externally, the shift away from centralized social networks to more dynamic niche, personal interest ones. How can we replicate that in organizations without the risk of them becoming their own silos that no one's allowed in because it's a small niche? Big challenges, I think. So these are great aspects or milestones really along that road to where we're going to get to with this chaos all around us, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that Bob Buckman's threat wouldn't carry much weight today. It was a different generation that was in the company. It was also a group of people who had never experienced any kind of social network before. How many of them had been on CompuServe? Probably very few. So he needed to use every tool in his toolkit to get people started with this. But the idea of a network, I think, continues to be important. Yammer, I saw many terrible implementations of Yammer, but I read a report from Deloitte where they worked with a company to launch it. And what they did was initially have 3 pilot groups. They identified 3 groups of employees who were struggling, largely because they were dispersed, different time zones, different geographic locations. And it was communication, the need for asynchronous communication that would improve what they were doing. And so they created these 3 pilot groups, and they held their hands through 90 days of using Yammer to help them get their work done. One of them was a group of people who used to work in the field. I think the report referred to them as graybeards. And now they had jobs in the offices. And these were people who were the least likely to use a social network, like a Facebook or a Twitter. But they became great champions of this because their cycle time, their time to market was reduced by 30 or 40% because of their use of Yammer. But they were using it in a strategic way with guidance from a group of people who knew what they were doing. And they were able to take those 3 pilot groups and tell those stories to the rest of the organization and have the people who participated serve as champions, so that when the rest of the organization adopted it, they adopted it for what it was intended in that organization to do, and was very successful. So go figure, if you're strategic about something, it works better than if you're not. And I think that's what's needed here. I'm not suggesting that, the typical enterprise social networks that we have seen over the years, and I'm trying to remember the names of some of them that I have worked with a lot back 10, 15 years ago, may not be the solution, but channels that allow people to engage and share information when some are remote and some are in the office, and some are in the field, and some are in the main office, the headquarters, and some are in different time zones in different countries. I think we still need that. We just need a culture of messaging that provides the guardrails and the rationale for why using this is part of the way I get my job done. It's not extracurricular. It's not something we do for fun. It's not something we do to build camaraderie. This is the way we work here, and then they'll work fine.
Yeah, I love your optimistic view there, Shel. Really, I do. But I don't disagree with you. One comment I did like in Sharon's LinkedIn piece, there's lots I liked, actually, but this one in particular, Susie Robinson says, I think this is a complex topic that can't be answered with a binary yes or no, as there are so many variables. I shared some thoughts, but not exhaustively, and honestly think it depends. I agree with that.
I love this woman. And that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.